because all they've done is tarnish the legacy that Bungie left them with. But they've also killed the spirit of Halo with their gross incompetence, which is why I came out here, to the graveyard, to visit Halo's tombstone and to pay remembrance to our fallen little Johnny, the Master Chief. 343 has had absolutely no idea how to handle this franchise they've been given. From completely remanufacturing the Master Chief's entire personality to rebooting Cortana's personality 3 times. What about when they hired people to work on Halo that actively hated Halo? You remember that time they villainized the Master Chief and falsely killed him off for marketing purposes? And then they would just fail to implement basic features like split screen despite promising to do so.
We have had to make the difficult decision not to ship campaign split screen co-op.
And worst of all, they allowed Master Chief to not only take off his helmet, but to take off his undies. After playing through Halo Unlimited, I fell into a depression that was so severe that I felt like I simply wasn't capable of reviewing a video game, because I just wasn't capable of enjoying a video game. It was that bad. That's what Halo Infinite did to me. But now, your favorite little boy in the whole wide world, Ren with 2 N's, is back, rejuvenated and ready as ever to finally review Halo Unlimited. I've really just been so disillusioned with open world games over the past few years. So one thing I've really been wanting more of are focused single player campaigns with no open worlds. And a little game called Wanted Dead delivers on that. Now, Halo Infinite was made by a bunch of hacks, whereas Wanted Dead allows you to hack and slash through enemy foes by pulling off these neat little combos where you combine the katana with a pistol. You can parry enemy attacks with your sword or stun them by using your pistol when you see a red glow. Then you can seamlessly transition behind cover and use your assault rifle for some long-distance murder. 343 decided not to implement finisher animations for when you assassinate someone, whereas Wanted Dead has laid down a foundation that allows for over 50 assassination animations, which have several combat applications. There are so many combinations and variations that allow for intestinal evacuations. This game has some pretty cool ideas, and it feels a lot like one of those older middle market games that you would have found in the Xbox 360 era, which makes a lot of sense when you consider that Wanted Dead was made by the folks that made the old Ninja Gaiden games. And like Ninja Gaiden, this game can be somewhat challenging. I like that. So this is important for you to know. Right now, for a limited time, Wanted Dead is up to 50% off on pretty much every platform. If you're on Steam, the sale ends on September 4th. For Xbox, the sale ends on the 5th. But for PlayStation users, the sale is going to go up until September 13th. So make sure to click the link in the description or in the pinned comment to check it out for yourself. Not doing so would be a grave mistake. And if you wait until the sale is over, you'll be coughing up more money. If you play Wanted Dead, you just might feel alive. All right. One thing I never cared for was how 343 always seemed to be chasing trends. They completely copied Call of Duty's loadout system with Halo 4, copied the mobility boom of the early 2010s with Halo 5, and now they've copied the open world epidemic that has plagued nearly every popular franchise and genre with Halo Infinite. What I find to be upsetting about this is that Halo used to create trends rather than chase them. Halo 1 had regenerative health, which quickly became the norm for FPS shooters. And it made FPS games playable for consoles, which was a formula that no other developer had yet to crack at the time. Halo 2 revolutionized online matchmaking as we know it. Halo 3 had a progression system for its multiplayer, which has now become the standard for nearly every online experience. The list of influences that the early Halo games have had on the FPS genre as a whole are both long and monumental. Bungie single-handedly changed the face of gaming while withholding his face from gaming. And that's why we all loved Halo. Because it was Halo. It wasn't trying to chase trends. It had no intentions of copying anything else. It was distinctly Halo. And thanks to 343, Halo hasn't been itself for over 12 years, and it never will be again. That, in essence, is why people are so upset with Halo Infinite. Because Infinite was 343's last chance to get Halo back on track, to prove that they understood what the fans wanted. But instead of doing something unique and original, they just tossed the Master Chief into an open world. An open world that is devoid of variety, inspiration, and fun. Say Halo to Zeta Halo. You will be left breathless and blinded by the sheer majesty of its scenic beauty. You will be filled with wonder as to why you're even playing the game. You'll be enraptured by its dynamic wildlife, which simply exists and does nothing more than fly or run away as you walk near it. Your sense of discovery will be tickled as you unravel the locations of Covenant propaganda towers that are spewing propaganda to nobody at all, as they've been placed in areas that the Covenant rarely frequent.
Man, I'm depressed.
You will be in awe as you uncover ancient Forerunner technology that is so advanced and so deadly that it can't even be seen by the naked eye.
What the fuck killed me?
And can simply never be understood.
As soon as I step on this thing, it kills me.
You will never tire of Zeta Halo's visual aesthetic, which consists solely of trees, skies, rocks, water, metal, and that's pretty much it. Some areas have more water, and other areas have more rocks. You just never know what you'll get here on the Zeta Halo. It really is a great place to spend 100 hours of my time making this video on. So to be honest with you guys, this video was a little daunting to get started on, because when I first played through the campaign 2 years ago, I had recorded 127 clips of footage throughout my legendary playthrough. But don't let my words fool you, because this playthrough was anything but legendary. 127 5-minute long clips that I had to watch, organize, and label for this very review. In watching clip number 2, I was immediately reminded of how boring the combat was on legendary difficulty, and you can tell how I'm playing that I'm putting almost no thought into my gameplay. I'm keeping my distance. When I take damage, I take cover. I'm barely using any grenades, and I'm rarely using my grapple. I played like this because 343 did a terrible job of implementing an adequate AI system, but also because they did a terrible job of tuning the game's difficulty. Playing on Legendary is probably the worst way to experience this game, because instead of sprinting, sliding, and grappling around like 343 intended, I am instead keeping my distance, backpedaling, staying close to one piece of cover, and even outright exploiting the open world combat encounters by grappling up to high ground and laying waste to the Banished. In fact, I would frequently grapple up on top of buildings and surfaces that the Banished have no hope of ever reaching. Then I would position myself so that I could shoot them, but they couldn't shoot me, making the enemies trivial and the combat tedious. Now, this could have been easily circumvented if the brutes and elites had jetpacks, you know, like they did in Halo 3 all those years ago. Or if the enemies chucked Hail Mary grenades up there at you, which they will do on very rare occasions. But generally, they just sat around and waited for me to end their life. It was like they were in a retirement home and I was their nurse, with the brutes being the elderly and my battle rifle being the pillow. Now, I got some ideas for some fixes that 343 is never going to implement, right? It would have been cool if at some point in the game the Banished had adapted to the Master Chief's new grapple ability by giving all of their brutes a crude, throwable hook that they could use to reach the Master Chief and force the player to be mobile. Or, you know, just give them the ability to simply call in a Wraith or a Banshee as reinforcements, which would again prevent the player from sitting still and practically breaking the game. Now, there are a lot of reasons that the game wound up this way. Number 1, the open world being as open as it is allows the player to exploit its openness. Number 2, subpar AI. Number 3, the grappling hook. So we're only an hour into my first playthrough here, and already 2 of the game's major selling points, which are the open world and the grapple, are actively ruining my experience with the game. And by the way, this is what the bulk of my combat encounters looked like on my legendary playthrough. So to make sure this wasn't a fluke, I decided to play through the game again on heroic difficulty, where I admittedly did have a much better time with this game, capturing 64 more 5-minute clips along the way that I now had to watch, organize, and label. The crippling despair I endured when I realized that this video was going to be over an hour long was boundless. And I just couldn't cope anymore, so I started drinking soft liquor. But I can't even get the cork off. So, 14 hours of footage to sift through, 3 weeks of writing, and God knows how many hours of editing. I was in for one long, depressing and arduous journey. And worst of it all, I had no idea how I was even going to begin structuring this video, because the game itself is so damn messy. So I started smoking again. To deal with the stress of it all. I swore to myself years ago that I was finished with hooch and huffing, but that emptiness that Halo Infinite left me with had to be filled with something, because God knows the combat wasn't doing anything for me. You spend the bulk of your time in this game battling the Covenant in combat, in bland, underdeveloped, uninspired, raw combat. Now, I will say that some of the new additions to the gameplay sandbox were really fun, like being able to grab fusion coils and throw them at the Covenant. I mean, even after my second playthrough, this mechanic has yet to get old. Enemies can grab and throw fusion coils as well, but because their AI is so bad, they almost never do it. However, when they do, you can grab their fusion coil out of the air with your grapple and toss it right back at them, which is super badass. So this grappling hook, it sounds pretty good, and it feels really fun to use. And on the surface, it would seem that the grapple adds a lot to the sandbox, and to be fair, it really does add quite a bit. It's a very useful tool. You can use it to shock enemies, grab weapons, traverse the open world, yank a jackal's shields out of the way to pop off a headshot, and you can of course use it to get out of danger if you're near death. But in actuality, it ends up taking away far more than it adds, becoming a detriment to the overall experience. As I mentioned earlier, the grapple allows you to reach areas that make it impossible for the enemy to stop you, but it also allows you to skip entire combat sections within the main story missions. The grapple also breaks the enemy AI and disrupts the flow of combat. Like, look at this. During this fight, I overexposed myself and got into a little bit of trouble, so I quickly grappled away. But I wasn't safe yet, as I was being aimed at by this jackal sniper. A jackal sniper which, mind you, I just had my back to for about 20 seconds, and during that 20 seconds it chose to completely ignore me and stay right there all by itself while it watched me slaughter its brothers in arms. So I kill it like it's nothing. And now, there is nothing happening. The enemies that just took out my shields aren't tossing grenades at me or chasing after me to finish the fight. Instead, they just hang out for 30 seconds of no fun until I got my shields back. So because you can use the grapple to skip past entire combat sections in the main story missions, use it to get to positions that are impossible for the enemy to reach, and also use it to disrupt the flow of combat by completely and utterly confusing the enemy AI, that makes me think that 343 just kinda threw the grappling hook into the game as an afterthought. Because it certainly doesn't seem like they designed this game around the notion that the player would always have a grappling hook. It's far too overpowered. Alright guys, check this out. While I was fighting this brute, I did a little experiment. I wanted to see how long it would take for him to find me again after hiding from him.
Where is he? You're dead when I find you.
Now, in all fairness, this doesn't happen very often. But what does happen often is this right here. My shields were almost gone, so I hide in a corner. But I think for sure that I'm dead, because outside there's a handful of grunts and jackals, and on my room to the left there's 2 brutes with shotguns. I was expecting plasma grenades to be thrown in here, or for the brutes to charge me down, you know, with their close range weapons, but instead they did nothing, and allowed me to heal up and kill them all. Now I know I'm reiterating the point I just made in the grappling section, but this is how combat tends to play out 95% of the time. If you leave their line of sight, the enemy is more than happy to just let you catch your breath. I have clip after clip of this happening throughout both my playthroughs, where my shields would get low, and I would break line of sight to escape, leaving the enemies to believe I completely disappeared, much like a newborn baby believes mommy disappears when she covers her face with her hands, before quickly removing them and saying, boo. In Halo 3, the brutes would not allow our Johnny to get away with such shenaniganery. I replayed Halo 3 again on Heroic for this video, and I was embarrassed by how many times I died. If I got down to low shields and hid behind a corner, I would either get a grenade tossed in my general direction, or I'd be instantly charged down by one or sometimes even several brutes. And when you have a mechanic like regenerative health, a good way to make combat exciting is to keep the player's health low for long periods of time so that battles feel tense. Bungie crafted these firefights in such a way that they don't give you room to breathe, but you never feel suffocated either. It's this perfect balance of challenge and fun, and when the enemy is smart, you genuinely feel as though you've defeated a worthy adversary. Unlike in Halo Infinite, where it feels like the enemy doesn't care if I kill them or not. It's like they have full-blown apathy. I know I do. And it really makes you wonder how these tactless idiots were able to defeat both the Covenant and the UNSC in between Halo 5 and Infinite. You know how after 7 years of service, an artificial intelligence entity like Cortana will go rampant, causing their brains to implode due to the massive amounts of data that they've collected over the years? Well, I'm pretty sure that the artificial intelligence in this game is in the terminal stages of its rampancy. You'll see what I mean when I roll the clips, but I have to reach the top here, because if you don't see it, you'll be unsatisfied for narrative purposes. Roll it. So instead of going for cover or tossing a grenade at me, this elite instead just bobs around a couple of times. Grunts would try to get away from me by jumping towards me. Elites would get themselves stuck in a wall, and of course, you know, this was an elite that I had to kill in order to progress the story. Brutes with rocket launchers would just stand still and allow me to shoot them. Hammer chieftains were sometimes unable to chase me. When I went to run over enemies with a ghost, instead of jumping out of my way like they did in every other Halo, they just put their arm up and waited to become a ghost themselves. A truly honorable death for a Sang healing. As a matter of fact, on Heroic difficulty, the Ghost is insanely overpowered. The Coveys can't do anything to you if you're in a Ghost. They try to throw grenades, but they always miss. On rare occasions, they will hop onto the Ghost to pull you out of it, but they don't commandeer it themselves like they would in previous Halos, making this a slight inconvenience as opposed to the complete showstopper that it used to be. I think this just goes to show you not only how bad the AI is in the game, but also how little thought 343 put into the open world combat arenas. But hey, hold on now. The new Charger enemy type is pretty cool and pretty smart. They charge at you like a rhinoceros, huffing and puffing, striking fear into your heart, for as they draw closer, so too does death. Unless you just grapple away from them real quick. They simply refuse to bob and weave, but instead choose to run towards you in a straight line. And that's if they even bothered to run at all. Sometimes they would fail to charge at me if I stood in certain places. Sometimes they would just stand still. And sometimes they would fail to charge by getting stuck on some geometry. The Chargers here have a lot in common with the Chargers from football, as they have clearly been concussed. And I guess I should mention the new skimmer enemy type as well. I'm pretty sure 343 named them skimmers because they were skimming the bottom of the barrel when they created these fellas. Skimmies are essentially the same thing as the drones from previous Halos, and they add absolutely nothing new to the Halo sandbox. The game is more fun on Heroic difficulty because here you can involve yourself in the combat more thanks to the fact that grappling into and through combat is a lot more viable on Heroic, allowing for extra creativity and player expression. And if you use the mouse and keyboard, you can really start having some fun with it. Being able to finally experience everything the combat had to offer was cool for a while, but then it quickly got stale thanks to the complete lack of dynamism. In previous Halos, the enemies truly felt like they were on the same team, working together to kill you and reacting to one another. If you kill a brute in Halo 3, all the grunts in his squad would scatter away in fear of their lives. Whereas in Halo Infinite, it's like all these enemies have been hired by independent contractors and they're all just kind of hanging around. So in finally making this video, I realized why I never made this video. Because when I review a game, whatever game I'm reviewing becomes a huge part of my life for the 2 to 6 weeks it takes me to make the video. And Halo Infinite is just not a game that I want to have in my life. I absorbed so much Halo Infinite that it became all I knew. When I would close my eyes each night to go to sleep, I was forced to relive entire combat sections. Instead of enjoying time playing with my dog, I was subjected to ceaseless ruminations as to why the combat was so boring. And when I would go to visit my therapist, she would ask me, she'd say, "Ren, how are you doing today?" And I'd say, "Doc, it's not looking good. I got nothing in my chest. Nothing but dust and echoes." And then she'd say, "All right, well, what do you want to talk about today?" And I looked her in the eye and I told her, "I want to talk about the open world." I think that the Zeta Halo is one of the most uninspired open worlds in all of AAA gaming. It doesn't feel believable at all, and a large part of that has to do with the ambient sound effects, which are of birds, deer, and other woodland creatures, to the point where it sounds like we're in the woods of Earth, rather than on, a Halo ring. And there's never anything going on within the Zeta Halo. It's completely lifeless. It's the open world equivalent of a fleshlight. Every now and again, you'll find some Banished walking around. What are they doing and where are they going? Who cares? Doesn't matter. They're just gonna despawn in 30 seconds anyway. You'll also see some Marines walking around. What are they doing and where are they going? Who knows? Doesn't matter. They just walk around in hopeless desperation, waiting to steal a glance of their favorite little Johnny. On occasion, the Banished and the Marines will fight, and there's also a day-night cycle. That's about all we get out of this AAA open world. There's occasional wildlife that you might stumble upon, which are just background dressing, and that's cool, I guess. But it would have been really neat if there was dangerous wildlife that could seriously alter the course of a gunfight. I'm sure plenty of other people have used those two big creatures from Halo Reach as an example of this in other videos. But imagine something as huge as these things just roaming around the open world. If they see you, they'll try to chase you down. Grappling up the side of a cliff would be of no use, as it would climb after you, stopping at nothing to destroy you, throwing boulders and brutes at you as you try to escape. Maybe you could trick one of them into chasing you to a brute stronghold to help you destroy it. Maybe you could stumble upon a group of Banished trying to capture one of the creatures by throwing a big net over it or something like that. Anything to just make the world feel more alive. And not all the wildlife would have to be dangerous. Maybe you could have an ongoing side quest where you could try to kill docile creatures like moas to feed the Marines, which would give you a little something extra to do while you're traversing from one area to the next. And why are we just stuck with this one look? The woods. There's honestly no excuse as to why there isn't more visual variety. Because we're on a freaking Halo, for God's sake, where within the span of 100 feet, you can go from being in a tropical island setting to being on a snowy mountain. So I need to pose the question, why aren't there any separate weather biomes? We could do so much with this idea. Like, imagine a snow area where the ice affects warthog handling and the extreme cold weakens your grapple, making it less viable and encouraging you to use your thrusters so that you can boost and skate across the ice. Imagine a swamp area where visibility is limited. Or what about a desert area that has sandstorms which weaken your shields but also slow down enemies? All this stuff would not only offer a lot of variety in terms of visuals, but also in gameplay. It's just more missed opportunities to throw on top of the pile. So one of the first things the game has you do out in the open world is capture an FOB. Capturing an FOB is accomplished by killing every enemy at the FOB. There's not really an option for stealth, and the Covenant really don't call for backup. All that required of you is to simply kill them. and this is the case for every single FOB you capture. Capturing an FOB allows you to fast travel to it, so to maximize your efficiency, it's best to simply just capture all the FOBs as you pass by them. It isn't too long until doing this becomes an absolute chore, because if you've cleared one, you've cleared them all. Lucky for us though, there are other side activities you can complete, which add absolutely no variety to the gameplay experience. This one has you saving Marines that have been captured by the Banished. To complete this activity, you simply kill every enemy in the area. And that's pretty much it. To be fair though, 343 did give the player a lot of creative liberties here, as you do have the option to free the Marines before killing all the enemies, which is truly groundbreaking stuff.
You're done for. Thanks for that. We're with you, Chief.
And to make things even more dynamic, sometimes the Marines haven't been captured yet, and are in the middle of a fight with the Banished. You really never know what this game is gonna do next. And I took care of these combat encounters a little bit differently than I did the others. Instead of simply taking the high ground, I took the high ground, but in a vehicle. And they never even knew I was there.
That's why the Marines call you a legend, Chief. HVT in range, Chief. This one's a particularly murderous grunt. High Sumter Bricklard. He's one of the UNSC's most wanted. Don't underestimate him, Chief.
High-value targets are kind of like mini-bosses that you need to kill. But then after you kill them, you've of course got to kill every single other enemy in the area, otherwise it doesn't count. Most of the mini-bosses don't add anything to the gameplay. Some of them die in one shot. Some of them are really spongy and have a lot of health. Some were incredibly easy to exploit. But almost none of them brought anything unique to the table. There was only one high-value target encounter that forced me to play differently and added some dynamism. It was the two Hunter brothers. I had to constantly keep moving during this fight because they were always putting pressure on me. For once, I was forced to swap off of my grappling hook and use my thrusters, which turned me invisible for a few seconds, giving me some room to breathe. I was frequently running out of ammo because they had so much health, forcing me to scramble around the arena for fusion coils and scrounge for whatever weapons I could find. This encounter was genuinely fun. In fact, I'd say most encounters with the Hunters were pretty fun on Legendary, as they were the only combat encounters in the game that genuinely kept me engaged.
Take out that silo.
Then there's these Banished outposts you need to sabotage by destroying fuel silos and punching motherboards. You can expose the silos by interacting with a device. Then you toss a sticky grenade onto it and say, "Silo Nara." After doing this with 3 to 5 silos, you'll go inside of some buildings and punch the mommy boards. The mission ends once you complete these tasks, and mercifully, you're not forced to kill every single enemy in the area like you are with every other side mission. These all play out practically identically to one another, especially on Legendary, where I would just get up to the high ground and lay waste to these primitive beings without thought or remorse like a true hero. I will say, however, that on Heroic, these missions did not play identically to one another because I chose not to play them at all. Apart from picking up the occasional collectible, this is really all we have to do out here. It's 4 side activity variants, and 3 of which require you to kill every single enemy at that objective. And you're expected to complete each of these 4 activities about a dozen times each. And after completing just 1 or 2, you'll have experienced everything each side activity has to offer. They're all devoid of variety and unbelievably tedious, especially when you do them back to back. There's so much you could do with an open-world Halo game in terms of side content. Like maybe there could be an obstacle course for the mongoose where you gotta drive through little rings in a certain amount of time. Or maybe there could be an on-rails activity where a Marine drives a Gauss Warthog through a little course and you need to shoot targets. Or give us a training simulation of some kind that spawns in a scarab and you need to destroy it. But maybe you'll be given a fixed loadout for each separate activity, and destroying it quickly or with more style gets you more points. Maybe you could hack a monitor and solve little puzzles that, once you complete them, will have an effect on the repair process of the Zeta Halo. Or an activity where Cortana shuts off the cooldown of your grappling hook and allows you to whip and zip through some kind of obstacle course. There is so much you could do here, but 343 opted to, instead, do pretty much nothing at all. After completing all of the available side content, I had no choice but to play through a couple of main story missions to unlock some more riveting side content. And I gotta give credit where credit's due. Those transitions from open world gameplay to campaign cutscenes are smooth as butter.
There. This should be impossible.
So, after playing a few missions, I noticed that there was no visual variety at all. Nearly every single story mission just has you going through linear hallways, which are almost always either bright blue or bright red. This is the visual aesthetic you're forced to look at throughout the entirety of the campaign, with very few exceptions. Sometimes the blue hallways you look at are extra big. One time there was some Forerunner smelting going on in this orange room. It was a real treat to finally see a different color. I think this is so unfortunate because Halo campaigns have always been known for their locational variety and their iconic visual aesthetic. You look at any classic Halo game and you'll instantly know what level of each mission I'm playing. There's Sierra 117 with its unmistakable jungle locale, the beach from Reach, or Cortana, a Covenant ship that is overgrown with flesh from the Flood infestation. Whereas in Halo Infinite you have the Sequence, with its exemplary blue Forerunner hallways. And who could forget the majesty of the mechanical wonders of the blue Forerunner hallways in Repository? And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the astonishing, time-worn Promethean antiquities that reside within the blue hallways of Nexus. And when you play through each mission back-to-back like I did for my heroic playthrough, it becomes really drab. This is pretty much all you have to look at for 5 straight hours. It's really repetitive and claustrophobic, which is so unlike this franchise. I mean, even Halo 5 had more going on. There was a snow level, a cave level, and something else. I mean, hell, even the TV show had a lot for you to look at. A UNSC facility, a rebel base inside of an asteroid, and a naked man in a bathroom. Early on in the story, you unlock a threat sensor, which, as you may have guessed, senses threats. It's really only useful for detecting invisible elites, and I almost never used it. Later on, you unlock the hard wall ability, which, you guessed it, puts a hard wall down in front of you. Then later on, you also unlock a thruster, which, thrusts you to and fro. The thruster, though, can be pretty fun, especially since once you upgrade it all the way, you'll turn invisible for a few seconds after using it, which is pretty neat, but also insanely overpowered for a game where once line of sight is broken, the enemy's brains break along with it. What I find a little strange about all of this is that the drop wall and threat sensor don't synergize with the other two abilities. To me, a grapple and a thruster go hand in hand with one another. There's a synergy here as they both encourage movement and they keep the chief in motion during combat, but the hard wall and the threat sensor promote exactly the opposite by almost forcing you to be stationary. And it is nice to have the hard wall as an option in combat. I mean, it did save me a handful of times on Legendary, but I think grappling on top of an even harder wall is far more fun than putting one down in front of me. And I don't know what 343 was thinking with the threat sensor, because my motion tracker on the bottom left corner of the screen there already senses plenty of threats, making the threat sensor threateningly senseless.
Lost, leave this to me.
In story missions, the bulk of your gameplay is comprised of these 3 things. Number 1, run down hallway. Number 2, shoot bad guy. And number 3, get battery. As you run down hallway, you come across a lot of rooms where you'd need to shoot bad guy. Most of the arenas where you shoot bad guy are very similar to one another and don't really add too much to the gameplay, but again, that's also thanks to the bland AI. And to be fair, there is a lot of verticality and separate flanking routes within these arenas, which is good because it makes you feel like you have more freedom, and it shows that they applied some thought to the level design here, but unfortunately, the verticality just gives me more opportunities to break the game. But I did start having a lot of fun once I discovered that I could skip the act of shoot bad guy entirely by incorporating run down hallway into my combat regimen. I would pretend as though the enemy didn't exist by running down hallway past most bad guy. Sometimes I would have to stop and shoot bad guy, but that's only because bad guy was preventing me from run down hallway. But in all seriousness, skipping combat encounters isn't very hard and it can be pretty damn exciting.
Uh-oh! Can I do it?
And and I really enjoyed skipping fights. Generally, I would just use the grapple and couple that with the ability to go invisible after using my thrusters. It felt super satisfying to know that I skipped through anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes of boring combat. But what made it even better was that I knew 343 didn't intend for me to skip so much combat, so it feels like I'm actively rebelling against 343's wishes, and that feels pretty good. I also found that I could skip encounters out in the open world as well. And that I could just fast travel back to safety even though there were enemies nearby, which was equally satisfying. But I think it says a lot that the most satisfaction I got from this game was when I was able to avoid playing the content within it. But you can't have too much fun in Halo Infinite. That would be against the rules. Every now and again, you're completely unable to run through hallway anymore because eventually you'll reach a locked door. And the only way to unlock door is to get battery. You'd think that having to go search for a battery would be a wonderful opportunity to enable the player to truly explore their environment. But instead, all you need to do is press down on the D-pad to scan for it and see exactly where it is, trumping the need to actually explore. Then, once you get battery, you put battery in battery slot, then the door opens and you're free to continue run down hallway. But there's a catch. You can't put battery in slot if you have to shoot bad guy. The game simply will not allow you to progress until everybody's dead. So these battery sections would always bring my playstyle to a screeching halt, which I hated. My assumption is that they implemented battery sections for 2 reasons. Number 1, to specifically prevent me from having fun. And number 2, this offers a break in the combat since the story missions are typically just a series of hallways that lead into combat arenas. Without this puzzle, you would just be mindlessly going from one fight to the next. So stopping all of your momentum entirely to find and insert some Forerunner Duracell battery is 343's haphazard way of shaking things up. Which is kind of lazy, because if 343 really wanted to shake things up between combat encounters, they could have had some, I don't know, platforming sections, especially since, we got a little thing called the grappling hook. Strangely enough, there was one platforming section in the entire game where you had to climb up this little Forerunner spire with your grapple. I mean, it wasn't much, but it was definitely more engaging than having to find a battery. You kids remember the days when Halo missions found more dynamic methods of fun level design implementation? Like there was this one part in Halo 3 where you go up to the top of this little hill and they give you a sniper rifle and some trip mines and then send a bunch of brutes up towards you, and you gotta hold out against them. Or what about vehicle sections? Halo is well known for its multitude of awesome vehicle sections, but the entirety of Halo Infinite's campaign has only one vehicle section where you're meant to drive this Scorpion tank up to the boss's big metal mansion. But it wasn't very viable to use the tank on Legendary since it blew up relatively quickly. And somehow on my heroic playthrough, I just missed the tank entirely and wound up grappling along the cliffside, and the Covenant literally could not do a damn thing about it. It was pretty fun though, but not all is lost, because every once in a while 343 would shake up the gameplay by implementing the occasional battle against a boss, or what we in the industry might call Halo Infinite pits the Master Chief against some of the most formidable foes in the galaxy, such as Bassus, who wields his hammer with the might of 100 men, who can be easily grappled away from and thinks that smashing boxes is more important than smashing the Chief. Formidable foes like Adjutant Resolution, an ancient Forerunner monitor who is tasked with defending the Zeta Halo, armed to the teeth with technology that is too advanced for the human brain to fathom. However, he was defenseless against my technique of hiding behind a corner and positioning myself so that he couldn't shoot me. Spartan killers like Hyperius, whose decades of hardened battle proved to be no match for this one simple UNSC trick that has all the chieftains worried.
Damn you, Spartan! You'll not win! Just like a coward.
And how could the history books forget about the epic battle with Tovarus, who stood valiantly and did little else? And what of the Battle of Jaga Radomnai? The Sangheili who slew every single Spartan you came across throughout the game with great ease, but could not figure out how to counter my strategy of simply jumping over this gap, dropping through the gap, and going back up through that gap. So seriously, if the boss in your boss encounter simply can't cope with the fact that I'm hiding behind a corner, then maybe don't put so many corners in the arena. If the boss can't keep up with me going up and down between the first and second floor, then maybe don't put a second floor in that room. And while we're at it, maybe don't put a bunch of boxes in the room either. And if all your boss can do is stand still, well then what are we doing? What's happening? I think this is genuinely garbage boss design. When I first played through this game, I really didn't think very much of it. But after weeks of going through footage and writing and editing, I've come to realize that I think I hate this game with a burning passion. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it is indeed an inexcusable dumpster fire. Case closed. I decided to take a break from working on this video by playing multiplayer to capture footage for this video. And you know me, nothing lifts my spirits quite like a relaxing multiplayer session. But I feel like the multiplayer here is just kind of busted. Everything about it kind of sucks. Like the UI is so cluttered and unappealing to look at and navigate. The battle pass takes too long to level up and the rewards for it are pretty lame. Sometimes it can't find a match and we're just sitting there for 10 minutes like we're playing the Master Chief Collection on launch day. And then there's just weird stuff that happens in-game. Like whenever I picked up the sniper rifle on this particular map, the game would start getting all jittery. And this would happen consistently on this map. And then to make things worse, when I booted up Infinite, it messed with my audio settings for my recording, so it used my webcam as my microphone, and this was definitely 343's fault and not mine.
Whoa, it's so laggy.
Sometimes shots just simply wouldn't register. So look at this, a direct hit to an enemy with a fusion coil is supposed to kill them.
Idiot.
5 minutes remaining.
What? I threw a fusion coil and it hit the guy and he survived. It was a direct hit. I have it on camera.
Send it to 343. Demand compensation.
No, I'm putting it in my video. I'll show them. I'll show those fuckers. I'll show the whole world.
Sometimes when I died, my corpse would just teleport to wherever I was half a second ago, which just made certain deaths feel questionable. And the vehicles were worthless. Anytime I hopped into a Warthog, it would get blown up within 60 seconds.
Are we already about to explode?
Yep.
Whereas in the older Halos, you could control a good portion of the map if you were a decent driver, which, ladies, I was. In Halo 3, I could land a Warthog wheels down in almost any situation. A skill set that really is nowhere to be found in Infinite.
There's a Banshee behind us.
Oh, goodness.
The map design is terrible. The sightlines are all too small and it makes everything feel claustrophobic. I also found that there was rarely an opportunity to retreat from a fight due to the constricting nature of these maps, whereas in the good Halos, I could use my wits, cover, and verticality to reset a fight back into my favor. The Infection game type was boring because the map it put me on was clearly not made for Infection, and as a result, I spent large chunks of time as a zombie just trying to find somebody to kill, only to be shot in the head from across the map. And as a human, I found myself just waiting around for some infected to approach me so that I could snag a few kills. And you know, it took them 2 years to implement this Infection playlist into the multiplayer, and maybe in 2 more years they'll find a way to implement some fun into it. The whole game also just feels so off in the multiplayer, and I struggle to come up with the words to express just how funky it feels. I think there's just like this ever so slight input delay or something, because it feels off. I figure it has to have something to do with the servers they use because the game doesn't feel like this in the campaign. Anyway, I didn't play much of the multiplayer because it's still in early access and I'd rather wait till it's finished before I start dedicating time to it. After busting out a few story missions, I had unlocked all of the side content in the Zeta Halo. And in an open world game, I always like to tackle all the side activities before completing the main game. So I got to work finding most of the Spartan cores, which allowed me to fully upgrade my Johnny. And I grinded out 2,400 Master Chief points, which unlocked the Wasp and allowed me to fly anywhere on the map as quickly as possible to maximize my efficiency. And it was here where I was able to get an even better understanding of why the open world ruined a huge portion of this game. You're able to spawn in whatever weapons you want at an FOB, so it's always a good idea to snag yourself a battle rifle and pick up a plasma carbine from a dead enemy. This combination of weapons is by far the most efficient in the game, and you don't need to worry about running out of ammo because there are weapon stations all over the place that will just simply refill all your ammo, as opposed to the previous Halos where you were meant to run out of ammo with certain weapons, which then encouraged you to swap them out for whatever you could find on the battlefield, and that kept things feeling fresh. And there were a couple of times during Infinite's story missions where I did run out of ammo and was forced to use a commando or a mangler or something like that, and it was somewhat refreshing to use a different weapon. But about 90% of the time I just used a battle rifle and a plasma carbine, which made the already repetitive combat loop even more tedious. Now, since we're not incentivized to pick up different weapons as we go, that disincentivizes us from experimenting with new weapons, or even from picking up power weapons, because using a rocket launcher or a sniper rifle is far less efficient than the battle rifle, and the power weapons run out of ammo too quickly. I'd be lucky to get about 10 to 15 kills with one of these. Whereas my battle rifle loadout rarely ever runs out of ammo, and if it does, I'll have been able to kill about 50 to 75 enemies before running out. But what this also does is it kinda puts a damper on exploration, since I now don't need to go looking for a better weapon when I'm out in the open world. So once you capture an FOB, it shows you every side activity, collectible, and Spartan core located nearby, meaning that you now have absolutely no reason to explore the open world since the game just told you where everything is. This is made worse by the fact that there's no health kit system like there was in Halo 1 and Halo Reach. In those games, if you were low on health, you were more inclined to check each room more thoroughly to top up. So with no health kit system, there's even less incentive to explore. And because this game has an open world, that just means it has a whole bunch of stuff cluttered all over the place. So to compensate, it needs a mechanic that allows you to scan your environment by pressing down on the D-pad, which also negates the need to explore. Mechanics like this take away so much life from the environments that the developers create. And when your environment is already as lifeless as the Zeta Halo, you're not left with a whole lot. In the original trilogy, there were big levels that almost felt like they themselves could have been their own open world map, with multiple tasks to complete in whatever order your little heart desired. You were encouraged to look off in the distance and wonder what mysteries may lie out of bounds, filling your head with wonder, but also deepening the environment and subconsciously deepening your connection with the game. Now, if you see something off in the distance that you're curious about, you can go there for yourself and see that all you were missing at the top of that mountain was an enemy of some kind, or a skin that you can equip for the multiplayer, or a sniper rifle. A sniper rifle that you could have just spawned into an FOB if you really wanted a sniper rifle. My sense of curiosity was never tickled because I always knew that there was nothing worthwhile to discover. The campaign only had one vehicle section, and I guess that's because 343 figured that the open world they created was one big vehicle section if you wanted it to be, but whoever thought of that is stupid. I would typically only use vehicles to get from one place to the next as quickly as possible. There was almost nothing else to do out here than to just simply follow the trail in front of me, unless of course I was flying my Wasp, and even then all I had to do was hold forward to make my way toward the next objective, because the skies were almost completely empty and provided almost no opposition at all. On some rare occasions, there would be Banshees that I had to destroy, but sometimes they were just flat out broken. One time I spawned in a Scorpion tank for fun, and it quickly became clear to me that 343 did not design this open world around the possibility that the player might hop into a tank. There were so many trees in my way here that it was almost impossible for me to reach my objective. I was forced to frustratingly finagle my way through tiny trees as the bigger trees obscured my camera, and at one point it looked like I was home free. But then suddenly my back left treads got caught on a tiny tree, so I was back to square one. Then, to rub salt in the wound, a Marine that was sitting in my tank passive-aggressively insulted me.
First aid driving, kill that elite.
I never was able to get that tank out of those woods, so I wound up abandoning it like 343 abandons plot points. I think Halo Infinite feels unfinished. The open world is lifeless and underbaked. The combat is boring because the AI is pretty bad. The campaign is repetitive with lazy mission design, and I genuinely believe that a large part of this is the fault of the open world. I can't help but feel that if they had instead opted to focus solely on creating a more traditional Halo campaign, that the missions would have had a lot more variety and could have been a lot more engaging since they could have dedicated far more resources to it. If they had cut the open world from the game entirely, it would have allowed 343 to better focus on delivering a fleshed out campaign, rather than having to deliver a campaign that is tethered to an entire open world, where each mission needs to begin and end on the Zeta Halo. I mean, think about it. Every Halo where you play as the Master Chief has you hopping between several planets, spaceships, and Halo rings. But in Infinite, with the exception of the first mission, we're always stuck on the Zeta Halo. And we're stuck there because that's where the open world is. And this makes Halo Infinite incredibly depressing. We waited 6 years for a product that underdelivered on all fronts. Multiple creative leads who were in charge of the overall vision for this game left 343, and that also lent itself to the end product feeling unfocused and underbaked. But what makes this all so sad is that there were small glimmers of greatness hidden throughout Halo Infinite. Like, some of the music really felt like Halo. I thought the physics they implemented were really good. The brutes can throw suicide grunts at you, and that's so cool. But over the course of my 2 playthroughs, I only ever saw this happen one time. Then towards the end of the game, there was this basic training arena that was actually really well made, both from a visual and gameplay standpoint. The combat section in this arena was genuinely pretty fun. It just goes to show how good arena design can make or break an encounter. But it's so much harder to make a good arena when you have to create it in an open world, when the player can approach the encounter from 12 different angles, 10 of which the developers didn't intend for. I was thinking a lot about what could make this game work better in terms of story and gameplay, and I came up with this idea that has you recovering the old classic Cortana throughout the game. She would start out all innocent and childlike in the beginning, but there would be data clusters that were intentionally left behind by the original Cortana that the new Cortana would be able to absorb. And as she absorbs more data clusters, she begins to recover memories of her old self until eventually she's able to be completely restored. Then that way her and the Master Chief could be together again. And this would weave itself into the open world sandbox so seamlessly as well. Instead of a sniper rifle or an enemy, they could have put a data cluster up on top of this mountain. Once you collect it, Cortana could get a memory back and she could reminisce with the Chief about something from the original trilogy, which would tickle the nostalgia centers of the fanbase's brains. Once you recover enough of the old data and she becomes her classic self, Cortana could talk about why she did what she did in Halo 5. Maybe she'd admit that she made a mistake, or maybe that the Warden just got her code all goofed up with some Forerunner tech and she just lost herself, but she always meant well. Then she would have to live with the fact that she committed mass genocide, which would motivate her to make up for what she did. She would be seeking redemption for herself by trying to undo the mess she created, but would also be seeking forgiveness from the Master Chief as well as the audience, since we have no idea what to make of her anymore. She went straight from an Alzheimer's patient to Space Hitler, and then to an innocent, adorable, childlike entity. And I feel like there's so much to unpack here with this idea that it could organically fill up a 20-hour campaign, and it has enough legs to carry on through into a sequel, because everybody in the UNSC would rightfully think that the Chief was out of his mind for carrying Cortana around again and giving her a second chance. It's a huge opportunity for drama, but instead of doing that, they did something else.
Can you hear me? This is UNSC.
I really wasn't a big fan of the plot in Halo Infinite. I was hoping that it would break my Benjamin and blow me away, but instead it stank. Hooba stank. I did feel like the villain's motivation was pretty solid. He was dying from some unknown disease and he wanted to fight the Master Chief to embolden his legacy or die an honorable death in battle. It's a win-win situation for the guy, and I found this to be very befitting of a brute. What I don't like though is that Escharum isn't the only villain. You would have thought that Atriox would be the main villain since he beat up the Master Chief in the beginning of the game, but Atriox doesn't have any bearing on the plot at all. Instead, there's a third villain called the Harbinger, and she represents a brand new threat called the Endless, whose motivations are unclear to me. At the end of the game, you kill the Harbinger, whose origins and motivations are also unclear to me, and we learn nothing. And that's the thing, man. We don't get anything out of the story. Nothing pays off. We do learn a little bit about what happened between this game and Halo 5, but that's pretty much it. There's 2 small character arcs where Chief warms up to the new Cortana and Echo 216 becomes less of a weasel, but everything else is essentially just a setup for future content since this game was supposed to last us for the next 10 years. But that just led to things feeling so hollow and unsatisfying. Like the Harbinger was just some villain of the week who eludes to something much, much larger, and Escherum's death doesn't seem to hinder the Banished at all, which makes it feel like what we dealt with throughout the story just wasn't consequential. In the post-credits scene, Atriox puts a key into a thing or whatever, and we gotta wait for a sequel or DLC to see what happens next. And that just feels so cheap. Like we're just being dragged around and getting set up for future DLC or sequels that will now most likely never come. And even if they do, I don't see how it could be satisfying because their intent was to draw all of this out for as long as humanly possible to maximize dat milkage.
This is UNS.
The cutscenes in this game are straight up boring. A lot of them are just filled to the brim with boundless exposition.
The structure's purpose is simple. Rebuild the ring.
Something, and I think we know who, has modified the sequencing needed to access the spires. It's just data. It's just here.
But then, in a strange turn of events, 343 took a page from the new God of War game by having all the cutscenes look like they were shot in one take, and I just find it so odd that Halo is now taking notes from God of War, and I think this really hinders our viewing experience, as we're now forced to sit through these long, unbroken, uncreative shots where the camera just slowly rotates around whoever's talking. Like, a lot of times. Whereas in the previous Halos, we were cutting back and forth from the inside of spaceships to boots on the ground of a Halo ring, and it truly felt like we were a small part of this big intergalactic war. But now, even though the stakes couldn't be higher, we're just sitting in a blue room watching Cortana struggle to pull data out of thin air. A lot of times. And it's just so uninspired. And yeah, there were a couple of cool moments, like this one here where Master Chief is in this spire that's about to blow up and he jumps out of it and lands inside of a pelican. But this is completely unnecessary. Chief doesn't need the pelican to pick him up because he doesn't take fall damage.
This is UNS.
In the previous games, Chief didn't have much of a character, and that was by design.
One of the keys to the success of the story is we didn't pump a lot of time into figuring out who the Master Chief was and why he was a ghost in the shell. We thought he is a husk. He's a big green suit of armor that you move around.
There's something good about having the Master Chief essentially be a blank slate. That helps each individual person connect to the character.
But he was supported by a fantastic cast of interesting characters like Sergeant Johnson, the Arbiter, the Gravemind, Guilty Spark, and of course, Cortana. This ensemble of characters kept things feeling fun, dramatic, and interesting. But in Infinite, he's surrounded by duds. New Cortana is kind of annoying, and Echo 216 is also pretty annoying and one-dimensional. His entire character is defined by the fact that he wants to go home and that he's a coward. I found him to be grating as he was constantly whining and complaining, giving the Master Chief some majorly undeserved attitude.
Let me guess. You're heading there too.
Affirmative.
Well, don't worry about me. I'll be here, waiting. Alone.
Breathe.
No! You don't get to tell me what to do. You don't get to tell me anything. Are you even listening?
No.
And then there's this scene that comes out of nowhere where the guy just starts talking about how worthless he is, which, I mean, he is right, he is kind of worthless.
I'm worthless.
And this whole outburst is completely overacted, underwritten, and feels so undeserved, while also making Echo 216 seem so childish. And then the Master Chief, who was designed to be a generic husk, gives some speech about being human.
We all fail. We all make mistakes. It's what makes us human.
This is all just so poorly handled.
I'm worthless.
My therapist says that if you struggle with feelings of worthlessness, that you should try these. Antidepressants. What I've been doing, though, is I've been trying to sell these to people that just bought themselves a copy of Halo Infinite. And so far, I've made $10. 343 messed up Halo so badly for me that it made me completely forget how much I used to love it. When the Master Chief Collection came out in the shape that it was in, I began to associate the original trilogy with the botched trilogy that 343 shipped. They practically overwrote the childhood memories I forged playing these games as a kid with memories of frustration, glitchiness, and betrayal, which turned my love for these games into white-hot disdain. And I tried so hard to enjoy both Halo 4 and the Master Chief Collection when they came out, but then at a certain point I realized that 343 was simply not capable of recapturing the magic that Bungie created, that I was holding out for something that was never going to exist. And I think that's what Halo Infinite represents to the community. It's a representation of the realization that 343 are not nearly capable of completing the task at hand, and that they have irreparably tarnished Halo's legacy. 343 have done one thing correctly though, which was they released and fixed up the Master Chief Collection. I mean, it only took them a few years to get it working properly, but better late than never, right? Kinda funny how the best thing 343 ever did was put out games that somebody else made. There is a pretty big silver lining in all of this though. Through making this video, I had to go back to play the first 3 Halo games, and by doing that, I was able to rediscover the passion, purity, and magic of that trilogy. 343 never stood a chance because that magic is impossible to replicate. The point I'm trying to make is, even though 343 is actively trampling all over Halo's gravesite, I'm still able to enjoy the contents of the coffin beneath it. So every once in a while, I like to boot up some Master Chief Collection and hop into the casket. And I, for one, genuinely believe that the future of Halo is looking brighter. A lot of the people who were in leadership roles like Frank O'Connor, Kiki Wolfkill, and Bonnie Ross have either been let go or have stepped down. And Microsoft has replaced several of 343's ground floor employees as well, which I think is fantastic because the folks that have been running the show over the past 12 years have been doing a pretty awful job. So for once, I'm feeling pretty hopeful about what 343 is going to come out with next. Sometimes things need to get worse before they can start getting better, which is important to keep in mind if you struggle with depression. But I'm glad that I finally made this video. It's been in the back of my mind for nearly 2 years now, and it feels so good to get this all off my chest. And there was absolutely no way I could have made this thing 2 years ago. I was simply not in the place to make a project of this magnitude. And admittedly, things still aren't great now, but things are good enough for me to be able to crank this bad boy out. And I want to thank the patrons and members whose support makes these videos possible, as I use the Patreon money to pay for editing software, props, and stuff like that. Things that improve the channel. And I really do wish that I had more nice things to say about Infinite, but I just don't. So if you want to see me talk positively about a game rather than rip into a bad one, go check out my previous video, which will be on the screen in a few seconds. And what do you know? I finished writing this script at exactly 3:43 p.m. Now, that means something to someone. That's it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm gonna play you guys off with a cheesy song I found about outer space. Bye-bye.
Take my hand and pull me to the unknown, the unknown.